Hey there, noble ones, will you look at that? I'm on Wired. Again, I won't do too long of a react to this because, again, the guy speaks Japanese, so I don't want to bore you to death. Let's see what sections we've got to work with, and I won't be reacting to the whole thing in order to encourage people to go check out the original video. So, introduction, samurai training, that's something I got a few things to say. Becoming a samurai. Are there still samurai? Obviously, the answer is no. So I wonder why it took how many minutes? From 2:48 to 3:48. Yeah, so it took him a minute to say no. Well, you know why? Because he's probably going to talk about when they were abolished. I imagine he's going to speak about that. Samurai weaponry. What's samurai trip? Yeah, new lingo for the kids. Samurai origins. Nice. He's going to speak about Yasuke. Samurai warfare. Samurai tats. Oh, tattoos. Is that what tat means in this context? Yes, it is. Then samurai lifestyle. Yeah, in modern day Japan, if you have tattoos, well, if you're foreign, it's not a huge deal, but there will be locations in which they'll ask you to cover them up because in Japan, there's a completely different, I don't have any tattoos, but there is a completely different culture when it comes to tattoos. Yeah, if you're going to an establishment and you have tattoos, you might not be allowed, particularly it's one of those where you go to like a public path. Samurai tat, samurai lifestyle, plain white rice. Ooh, that's another thing that I have a few things to say. Bushido, women samurai. Wow, it's a lot. It's a good episode.
こんにちは。日本の歴史を研究している小和田康常です。
Splendid. So it's already he's a researcher. Okay, very nice. 日本の歴史を研究している. So he's yeah, nice.
本日は侍に関するご質問にお答えいたします。
はい。
This is 侍サポート。
This is samurai support. He seems nice. I'm glad he's a historian.
まず最初のご質問ですけれども、侍のトレーニングはどんなものでしたか？鍛錬ということだとね、思いますが、当初は、一番大事なのは弓術、弓ですね。
確かに。Yeah, 弓術. So he's going into first the bow, then the spear, then the sword, perhaps.
弓をどのように扱うか、ということで。
I appreciate that. 弓をどのような使うか. So he's explaining what kyujutsu is. So once again, it's a good sign of a teacher when they use a word, kyujutsu. Also because in modern day, you have kyudo, the way of the bow. But when you talk about samurai history, a lot of these martial arts are going to be with the suffix jutsu or the kanji jutsu, which means art, and it's kind of more the martial context and application of the martial art, whereas the do version is usually more modern. So, of course, he's using the technical term, kyujutsu. Kyu being the way, the onyomi, so the Sino-Japanese way of reading the kanji yumi, which means bow. But then he explains to you what that means. I love it when I see that. He's speaking polite Japanese, very polite. Yeah, he's being very polite.
あとは馬術ですね。馬を
馬術. And then again,
どのように扱うか。
馬をどのように使うか. So once again, yeah, ba is one of the ways to read uma, which is the horse. Yes.
で、最後、組んだ時に敵を倒すためにね、剣術も学んでいた。で、剣も使えないような状況下で相手をですね、倒すために素手で戦う技術として発展していたのが柔術です。
Splendid. Yeah, jujutsu, in fact, is one of those that, because as he's explaining now correctly, obviously, so this guy knows what he's talking about. Appreciate that. We had a very good start. That's, I think, the main difference between how we see these martial arts, whether it be jujutsu, which you still practice. I know that in the West, sometimes the pronunciation jujitsu is more common, but in Japan, everyone says jujutsu. It's not wrong to read it jitsu. It's just that in my experience, 4 years in Japan, never heard it pronounced jujitsu. Everyone says jujutsu, ninjutsu. It's always the jutsu. It's a lot more common as a way to read the character for art. We see them as separate, right? We see, I practice jujutsu. You practice kyudo, kenjutsu, or kendo, whatever you practice, and then the other guy practice yaido or yaijutsu, and the other guy a samurai would have practiced all of them, everything. Yes, there are some people that are very enthusiastic in our days and maybe practice 2 martial arts, but a samurai would have practiced everything, every single one of these. Also because yai itself, which is also referred to as batto jutsu, so the idea of batto suru, so you draw the sword and attack at the same time. Yeah, it's just one thing that the samurai would learn, but then in the Edo period, you specialize into that as a form of artistic representation.
はい、こういうものがですね、発展していって時代をですね、経るごとに槍術、槍ですね、こちらにいるね。
Yeah, I knew it. It would go from bow to yari. Sojutsu, once again, the art of spear, but on its own, a spear would be called a yari.
こういったもの
Is that a yari though? The image, I think that's more of a naginata. Am I wrong? Is it like a yari head? No, that's a naginata. So I think the editor here just found the picture. He has got a nice daisho, so it's got the katana and wakizashi. But this is a naginata, unless I'm wrong.
槍をどのように扱うかというような技術も学んでいったということでね、日本のお城というのが水のね堀によって囲まれていたので、攻める時には水堀を越えていかなきゃいけないんですね、はい、陸で戦ってるだけではなくて水の中でも戦う必要が出てくるんです。ですので当時の武士は侍はですね基本的に
He's speaking about castles now, so I should call Shad, I guess, in a little bit. かしこまりました。ありがとう。One thing I want to say about that, did you ever see that there is an actual, is it a sport, kind of more of a traditional activity, which is swimming in samurai armor? It's still done in Japan. In fact, let me see if I can show you very quickly, because it is insane. Let's, wait. Swimming in samurai armor. Yeah, there we go. I gotta show you. AFP News Agency. I don't know if they're gonna copy claim, but I have to try and show you at least. If anything, I'll cut it out. Wait.
Old traditions kept alive.
Yeah.
It's always heartening to see old traditions kept alive. But is it really a good idea to take them in the pool? Welcome to the weird and wonderful world of traditional Japanese swimming.
Yep.
These moves originated from samurai fighting styles over hundreds of years and exist in various forms all over the country. Tadao Koga is the 11th generation master of one such tradition, the Kobori-ryu, and he
I really appreciate traditions that are kept alive like this, but let's see the guy underwater.
Strain is still obvious as Mutsuo struggles to keep buoyancy in spite of his heavy armor. Dad's philosophical about his performance.
He has strong legs, so if he had practiced more, he could have swum better. But he's in the workforce now, so he's a bit out of practice.
It may seem like they're making life unnecessarily hard for themselves.
I don't know who would think that it's a tradition. So it's to connect us to the past and not forget some of these things. Yeah, I thought it was amazing the first time I saw it. Did you notice though, if you are an enthusiast of samurai armor, did you notice that he's not wearing the lower part? In fact, is he wearing? Probably not. So that's actually there is some text that tells you from period if you are in armor and you need to cross a river, or you're on a boat, but you need to descend from the boat and you need to swim, remove the apron. Because apparently they thought that the apron would impede or perhaps would change the center of mass in a way, or change the weight, and they could be more dangerous. So they actually tell you what to do in those contexts. So I thought it was fascinating, because whenever you think of someone in armor, and for those who don't know, this is iron. In fact, cold rolled milled steel is the material that they usually use modernly to recreate these. But in period, it would have been either iron or mild steel, some kind of low carbon steel, all the way up to medium carbon steel. It would vary tremendously, also depending on the economic backbone of the person that was buying. In fact, some samurai, well, not really some, well, I would say half samurai, low-ranking samurai, and ashigaru armor was even made of paper. So it really depends, meaning like so many layers of paper that it kind of works a bit like your old school phone books. You got good luck cutting through one of those with a knife, because it's paper when it stacks. The only problem with that, you'd be like, so why did they even bother with iron then? Because it will be destroyed after a few battles. It will get nothing left. Not to mention it could catch fire. But anyways, iron is the superior material, clearly, and steel. But yeah, so this is metal. This is absolutely metal. The reason why it doesn't look like metal perhaps is because it's been lacquered. They usually don't use it. It's a modern suit, so it's been lacquered with a type of lacquer that is not exactly coherent one-to-one to the period one. The reason why I know that is because the period one is toxic. So it's not used anymore in Japan, nor in China when they recreate Japanese samurai armor. Anyways, that was just to give you a little context just to add to what Mr. Owada was saying. Very good. Up to now, we have a good start. じゃあ。
的には泳げたですね。次のご質問はどうすれば
Yeah, very, very. 次のご質問は、so he's being very polite.
侍になれたのでしょうか、一般的にですね侍というのは武士ということでね考えられているんですけれども、本来は侍、もともとの語源がサブラウということで、このサブラウというのは目上の人に仕えるという意味だったんですね。ですので侍というのは本来は下級貴族、貴族だったんですね。これが中世になってくると、そうすると
Kizoku is such a cool way to say nobility. I like that word. It's very similar to the word kazoku, which means family in Japanese instead. That's how I remember it. I think of kazoku is family, kizoku is nobility, and it is low nobility. In fact, the samurai is very similar. Now, I know that when I speak English, I say samurai, but the original Japanese pitch is samurai. It's a heiban pattern, so it's an accentless word, flat word for those who have studied Japanese pitch. Regardless, from now on, as I said it once, samurai, perhaps if I speak Japanese, I will pronounce it like that, but in English, I just say samurai and whatever, samurai, it's good. Doesn't matter. Just like when I speak English, I just say yari, rather than yari with the pitch. What I was saying is that it is true, it's a low type of nobility, similarly to medieval knights, although then again, when we look at medieval iconography and you see people in plate armor or mail with a great helm and they fight in the manner of the knight, they could well be men at arms technically. So to be a knight, you need to have the title. So if you're not knighted, you're not a knight. Even if you fight in the manner of the knight, you're still a man-at-arms. It's just that I think video games gave us this impression that a man-at-arms is just infantry, low ranking, not much money, and then the people on full plate on a horse, they're all knights. But the reality is that, mounted nobility are knights, but there are plenty of men-at-arms that look identical to knights in iconography. So it kind of depends. They won't look, it's their veterans particularly have excellent equipment and gear. With the samurai is very similar, because the samurai is, as he's saying, initially servants. He mentioned two terms, bushi, which is warrior, it's an umbrella term, and then he specifically said samurai, and then he's saying usually we use them interchangeably, they're not exactly the same. I 100% agree with him. In period, there were other words that would be a lot more ancient to describe the concept, generic concept of a warrior. For example, a word that I like a lot, which is musha. I don't remember the pitch though for this one, so you'll have to double check it on your own. But musha is cool because it's onimusha, right? The demon warrior. But musha is really, really old. It's a really old. So even in the times like the late Sengoku period, I don't think would they even use it anymore. I think at that point they would say bushi mostly. In fact, if you use musha in the Edo period, it might give you the same feeling you would get as to describe a modern Marine Corps soldier in America as a warrior. I mean, technically, but you know what I mean. So it's nice that he's mentioning that. Every samurai is a bushi, but not every bushi is a samurai is another good way to look at it.
血統重視というよりはですね、むしろ能力がある人材だったら、もともとの出身が侍ではなくても侍になることができたということですね。でこれが近世になりますと、日本におきましては戦争がねなくなるわけなんですね。そうすると、戦争がなくなるということは侍が
江戸時代とか
出世する見込みもなくなってくる、ですので没落していく侍もいたということですね。でそういう没落した侍のうちが身分を売ったりなんかするので、それを買った人たち、お金を持ってる人たちですね、もともと侍の身分ではなかった人たちが、侍の身分を買うことによって、
買うことができる。
侍になることができた。
素晴らしい。Yeah, that's a very nice explanation. I like him a lot.言い方。So one thing I want to add to that is, yes, he's correct. Absolutely. Of course. I mean, it's not like I am the one saying, guys, he's correct. No, but you know me. Sometimes the experts are horrible. He's good. He's legit. Initially, hereditary to be samurai, kizoku. So we said lineage. But then you can buy it, as he's saying, okanemochi. So rich people can start buying it because people were selling it. But then there is the half samurai, and I'm interested to see if he's going to mention that, particularly when we look into mid-Muromachi period. You have the concept of a half samurai, of a land samurai. There are lots of different varieties. And then there are people that become samurai because of their accomplishments. I think, isn't Toyotomi Hideyoshi one of these that actually became a samurai because he wasn't, he was lowborn. So you could be lowborn and become a samurai because you were incredible. Like on the field of first your valor directly in combat, and someone notices you, it's one of the reasons why samurai armor is so distinctive, so that people can recognize you. And imagine you've got your lord, and he's looking at the battle, maybe sitting down with his fans, but they are like made of wood to give directions. And so he's there, he's holding his fan, he's looking at the battle, and he recognizes you because you're wearing the kabuto and your colors and maybe your banner, fighting, and you're amazing. Then he notices that, and then at the end of the battle, you come back with all the heads of the enemy. So perhaps you manage to get someone important and bring the head of an important commander, officer perhaps, and then you could be promoted. And then if you continue, maybe you become an officer, then your strategy, your intelligence, and then they're like, this man, samurai now, he's samurai, so you're high status. Very rare, but it did happen. So I wonder if he's going to mention that too.
侍ですので、基本的には侍の血筋を引いていた、要するに貴族の血統を引いていた人たちが侍になることができたということになるかと思います。
なるかと思います。I want to tell you one thing about the expression he just used. By the way, I think the subtitles are good. Whoever did it knows Japanese. Become a samurai, one has to be an aristocratic lineage initially, yes. But I want to show you this because it's a cultural aspect. So this is an expert. He's a historian. He's a researcher. From a Western perspective, if you're asked a question about your field of expertise, experts speak confidently and categorical statements depend. So it's difficult to make categorical statements. But I mean, if the question is easy enough, did the Roman Empire exist? You can give a categorical statement. Unless you're one of those crazy people on TikTok. But Japanese people, he ended it as kato omoimasu, which means I think. And so if you speak Japanese but you're not familiar with the culture, he is confident with what he's saying. But the simple fact that he says, I think you would have had to be of aristocratic lineage, it's not because he doesn't know, it's because he's being polite. It is considered polite in Japan, even if you are certain about something, to rather than finish your sentences with a statement of fact, which you would finish with for example, the word des or da, if da, dayo, depending on the level of formality, to say to omoimasu, because too much confidence is considered to be rude, linguistically speaking. And that's something you need to know when you listen to historians like this and in general.
次のご質問は、侍は現代にもいますか？
いない。
侍という身分階級はですね、日本の近代に消滅しております。で、侍というのは何かというと、実際にですね、見た目で侍と分かるようになっていたんですね。その人
見た目で侍わかるようになっていたね。So yeah, interesting. So he's saying, of course, as you can read in the subtitles, you could tell that someone was a member of the samurai class just by looking at them. I have a lot to say about this. I will let him speak first and perhaps add.
一つが曲げを言っているということなんですね。頭に曲げを言っている。で、もう一つが刀を刺している。ですので曲げを言って刀を刺している人がいたら、それは傍から見てもそれは侍だというふうにね見られていたんですが、これが近代になると1871年に政府がですね、新政府が散髪脱刀令という法律を出しまして、もう曲げは言ってはいけません、刀を刺してはいけませんという法律をね、出しております。
Okay, there is a lot to unpack here. It's not that he said anything wrong. Once again, he's fantastic. But I do want to underline the first thing that he said about the looks of a samurai. So we've got the chonmage, so the hairstyle, indicative of warrior status and aristocratic status up to a point. And then the wearing of the sword. First of all, just like he mentioned now, that at one point there will be he used the word shometsu suru, so they basically banish the samurai class to be able to wear the swords. But this isn't the first time that the government and the state kind of issued in Japan, in feudal Japan, specific regulations when it comes to whether you were allowed to wear a sword or not. In fact, that sort of statement was already made by the authorities before this, and it happened for the farmers, the peasants. So they made a statement saying peasants cannot wear a katana, peasants cannot wear a wakizashi. You can't do that. What does that tell you? Well, it tells you that people were doing it. Otherwise, why would you make a statement about it? And they say, no, from now on, I don't remember the exact date, I'll double check it during editing, but in general, they said, no, now only the samurai class, the bushi, ashigaru, are the ones allowed to wear swords, particularly the two swords. Otherwise, you can't do it. which means that they were doing it. Maybe a successful farmer could buy a cheap sword and just put it in and wear it. So that's something that, depending on the period, you could see someone who isn't samurai and is wearing a sword. So very much depends on the period for whether or not we could apply this rule that he's explaining now. When it comes to the hairstyle as well, that very much depends. So in the Edo period and at the end of the Sengoku Jidai, really at the very end, when we are in 1600, so 1599, 1600, 1601, at the very end of the Sengoku period, beginning of the Edo Jidai, you would have the very shaved hairstyle, like all the way back, started to become more typical. Some samurai would just shave a little bit the front, so you had both styles at this period. And then they tended to be higeosoru, you say in Japanese, so they would shave. But if you go earlier on in the same Sengoku period, and then you go to Muromachi, even before that, all the way down to Heian Jidai, not all samurai would have this. This wasn't common either at that time. The chonmage, the long hair was a thing. Yes, but they could have it. Could wear it in a ponytail, for instance. That's why sometimes you see that in video games. Occasionally, if you've seen it, the chonmage becomes a thing after a certain date. They wouldn't shave, so samurai would wear beards, and you can see that. Let me see if I can show you a piece of iconography to prove what I'm saying. For example, samurai warlords. All right, and let's check images. These are just a few that I found in 2 seconds, but I mean, look. Full beard here. Here you've got a little bit of mustache and a little beard. You will notice that, particularly in the early Sengoku period, a lot of the lords were wearing, and it was considered manly. It was considered manly. Now, this is Toyotomi Hideyoshi, but we can find Oda Nobunaga, for instance, also is one of these. Let me see if I can show you that. Oda Nobunaga. There we go. Yeah. There he is. See? And we see this again, they're not clean-shaven. So that's something, the clean-shaven look on a samurai becomes a fashion, but it wasn't always a fashion. And if you consider how long samurai history is, then you'll realize that these fashions change. Same with, look at this image, for example. He doesn't even shave. His hair is full. So it really depends on what period we're looking at. And as a one last item, I remember that the government did issue specific rules when it comes to the way you were wearing your hair. And so they start prohibiting the lengthening of your hair to some of the lower classes to once again differentiate with the samurai class. There are some regulations for ronin as well. So there is a lot to unpack when it comes to you look and you think you can recognize, oh, that's a samurai. It depends on the period. Very much depends on the period. Am I top right? Yes, I'm top right. Great.
これが近代になると1871年に政府がですね、新政府が散髪脱刀令という法律を出しまして、もう曲げは言ってはいけません、刀を刺してはいけませんという法律をね、出しております。
Clearly a matter of social control at that point.
これによって侍という身分制度がもう完全に崩壊をして、侍は、ですのでもう現代の日本の社会にはねいないということになります。
いないとことになります。Very, very polite speaker. Let me give him a good... He's really cool, by the way. I love the way he looks. かっこいい. So, I appreciate that he's saying this because, believe it or not, I hate it when they do things such as... I don't seem to be able to see it now, but there are plenty of videos where they're like, we interviewed a modern samurai. It's like he's not a samurai. Just because someone practices martial arts does not make him a samurai. Ninja run, yeah. So anyways, let's keep watching a little longer and then I'll take a break.
次のご質問。侍が刀を武器として使用したのって具体的にどの時代ですか？その前はどんな武器が使われていたのです。
Yeah, he already answered to this one, really. He spoke about spears and bows. I think he's going to go back to that.
刀を使い始めたのは中世ですね。そういう時代に刀を主にね、使っております。じゃあそれ以前に使っていたのは、キューバの道というようにね、弓ですね。古代においては武士は侍はですね、馬に乗って戦っていた。ね、ちょうどここにある鎧、このようなものをね。
Yeah, that one is an oyoroi. I've never owned an oyoroi. I've owned couple of the modern one, Tosei Gusoku is the technical term. So the modern armor that was more common in the Sengoku period, so like 1500s, I want to say, as a date of reference. This is the Oyoroi, however, and even the one that I had before, I had at one point, I did have an armor that was modeled upon a type of armor reminiscent of the Muromachi period, but it still was not an Oyoroi. An Oyoroi would be extremely heavy, and this is one point that I hope he's going to make. Well, we'll see if he does, because you know how oftentimes people say like, oh, medieval knights were so heavy and they couldn't move, which is of course nonsense, but then they say samurai instead, the armor is built to be agile and quick. Yeah, not the Oyoroi. The Oyoroi, most of it would hang on your shoulders, whereas the Tosei Gusoku, the type of samurai armor that I have, it's kind of more low profile, and most of the weight is at your natural waist, but that would hang on your shoulders, and it could be as heavy as 30 kilograms, which would be heavier than quite a bit of plate, in fact, depending on the set. So, Oyoroi was not. It depends. It depends on which armor we're talking about.
着ていたんですね。ですので、ちょうどね、この鎧というのは前と横と後ろに、これ草吊りと言っておりますけれどね、馬に乗った時にももを保護できるように、よく考えられている鎧なんですけれどね。
I apologize, you're not watching what I see. Sorry about that.
ちなみにこちらの鎧がね、袖がかなり大きいんですね、これね。なぜかというと、これは矢で射られた時に盾にするんですね。日本の侍というのは盾を持っていなかった。馬に乗って戦います。
Well, samurai did have shields. It's just that they are stationary shields. In fact, they're called tate, as he's saying. But he's not wrong. Of course, he's simplifying for the presentation. Samurai did use shields in a similar way to how early northern Italian mercenary forces, like the Genoese crossbowmen, used them. So, stationary shield, bow and arrow. That's one thing. When it's mounted samurai, he's absolutely correct. The sode, so the shoulder plates, particularly in the earlier models, were particularly large because they are functioning effectively as a shield you wear. And of course, the top of the helmet is one of the most resistant areas, so thickest parts of the armor, so that's another thing you can use to protect yourself from arrows. And these are all here to deflect. But in general, he's absolutely right. These are pretty much an alternative to a shield because the samurai is using both hands. He's saying here to hold the reins. That's not really a problem. You can hold a shield, as medieval knights did it, and hold the reins with the same hand. You can totally do that. But I think it's because of the kind of weapons that they were supposed to operate: bows, two-handed swords, spears.
ですので、手は手綱を持っている、左は手綱を持っていて、しかも弓を射るときにはそれ手を離さなきゃいけないですね。ですので、盾なんかとても持てませんので、このようにですね、左右に肩に大きな袖をつけていて、敵にね、いられそうになったらこうやって、盾代わりにしていた、そういう戦い方をしていた。基本的には
素晴らしい。One more thing when it comes to Japanese warriors, remember, samurai did not usually use handheld shields, but there are exceptions. I have seen, so what he's saying here is not categorical. I have absolutely seen a piece of iconography. I'll see if I can find it. If I can't find it, I'll find it later in editing and put it on the video when I post it on the channel. But I have seen a piece of iconography that shows a samurai holding a shield. It's just that it's extremely rare. And the reality of fact is that even though the samurai usually, for the most part, by and large, did not use handheld shields, Japanese warriors did. And the way I'm making a distinction here is because Iron Age and Bronze Age Japanese soldiers used straight swords, double-edged, and they were holding shields. So completely different. So Japanese warriors and ancient Japanese warfare as a whole did absolutely include shields, handheld shields at that, wooden construction. But when it comes to the samurai, usually, exceptions exist, usually they don't use them as handhelds, but they do have the stationary ones.
刀を使うシーンというのはそんなにはないんですね。組み打ちをして相手を馬から落とした後に刀を抜いて刺すとか、そういう使い方をしておりましたけれども。
Okay, so now he's saying that katana, I disagree with him a little bit here because he's saying that the katana is used mostly to finish off opponents, not... He's right that it's not a main weapon, 100%. Katana is a backup weapon. But you didn't just use it to finish people off. Maybe I'm taking him a little too literal though, so I do want to give him not the benefit of the doubt. He's great. I just can't think of an expression to say what I'm trying to say. But generally speaking, I would like to underline, yes, you would have seen if you were into a battleground of the Sengoku period, and we can see this, by the way, ancient traditions of combat, specifically in Kenjutsu, tell us about how you cut down as many bodies as possible around you, and you can see that they are designed for that, as opposed to modern kendo, which is designed to focus onto one opponent and try to, still effective style, but very different thing in mind. If you were to participate or look at the feudal Japanese Sengoku period battleground or Muromachi period, Heian Jidai, you would have seen swordplay. You would have absolutely seen it. It's just maybe the beginning of combat, depending on the era, would have started with arrows. It would have started with spearmen, blocks of ashigaru with spears, very long, just poking each other. But eventually, yes, you would have absolutely seen sword combat, not just to end someone on the ground who has already been subdued. In fact, you can use the tanto for that. And all the way up to the Sengoku period, that's one of the things that Miyamoto Musashi excelled at, and he speaks a lot about jewels. The difference between single jewel in his scrolls that he wrote, the wind scroll, the water scroll and all that, he makes a lot of distinction between how you fight in a duel as opposed to how you fight on the battlefield. And once again, he speaks a lot about swordplay on battlefield. I do believe swords were used. They were a backup weapon, but they were still a war battlefield weapon.
あまり主要な武器としては使われていなかったのがね、古代の戦い。これが戦国時代になってくると、弓を用いているのは足軽なんですね。弓とか鉄砲とか飛び道具を使うようになってくるのが足軽で、侍はそういう弓とか鉄砲。
Once again, I disagree. No, samurai did use guns. 100% they use guns. And archers as a unit, yes, it becomes more common within ashigaru troops. Because he's saying, I imagine what he's going to say now is that samurai didn't use bows and guns and firearms because they used spears. That's what he's going to say. They did. Spear and naginata. Naginata in modern day martial arts is kind of seen as a woman's weapon. In period, it would have been both a man and a woman's weapon. So like if your wife was upper class and she would be trained in the usage of naginata, absolutely. When you're out for war and then if someone tries to mess with your people, she will know how to fight. Not all women would have known how to fight, but some women would have had a certain degree of training. But the naginata is absolutely a man's weapon, just as much as a yari. And yes, they are main weapons, but the samurai they do use firearms. They do. Although, of course, they also have gunners, units of gunners. I think the ratio, for what I remember, is 1 unit of gunner deployed for every 4 or 5 units of archers, bowmen, ashigaru bowmen.
を使わなくなってきたんですね。主にこちらにあるようにね、槍を使って侍は戦っていたので、槍はだいたい2メートルとかありますので、敵との間合いが空いている時には槍で戦ってたんですね。相手との間合いが近づいた時には刀を抜いて戦う。これが中世の戦い方ですね。はい、で日本における近世、江戸時代ですね。この頃になってくるとすでにもう日本は、戦争がなくなった時代ですので、戦場でですね刀を抜くなんてことはなくなってくるんですね。でこういう時に使うのは、闇討ちされ
even assassination attempts and all of that, yes. So I'll be back to finish watching a few more sections of this, but I might finish that one tomorrow. But thank you so much for everyone who has joined. Thank you for subscriptions. I really, really appreciate that. It means the world. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Noble Ones, for joining today, and I will see you later. Thanks again. Ciao, ciao, ciao.